What if a people emerged in Europe out of nowhere, speaking a language unlike any other around them? What if they began as fierce raiders, terrifying kingdoms across the continent, only to transform into guardians of Christian Europe? How could nomads from distant steppes forge a kingdom in the heart of Europe? The story of the Hungarians unfolds like a dark mystery, a tale of bold choices and irreversible consequences that shaped the fate of a nation. The tension lies not only in their rise, but in the price they paid to become part of an ancient civilization's fabric. What forced this transformation, and at what cost? Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Imagine the Hungarian people as a paradox, arriving as conquerors, yet becoming a shield for a continent under siege. These nomads, known as Magyars, swept through territories with ferocity, their raids haunting the nightmares of Western Europe. Yet, history took a cruel twist when these same warriors embraced Christianity and blurred the lines between barbarian and civilized. What inner turmoil haunted their souls as they abandoned their old ways? What dangers lurked in taking such a path? The stage was set for a clash of identities that would define their legacy. Beneath the surface of this transformation lies a haunting question. How did a small tribe survive the merciless struggle between 2 colossal empires, the Ottoman and the Habsburg? Their neighbors faded from maps, swallowed by time or conflict, but the Magyars endured. Was it sheer will, cunning, or alliances forged in desperation? The edge of survival sharpened every decision into a knife's point, where one wrong move meant oblivion. From a tiny tribe, the Magyars molded a multi-ethnic empire that stood as one of the great powers in the 19th century. This empire was not born overnight. It was the product of relentless adaptation, fierce battles, and a ceaseless fight to maintain identity amidst chaos. Theirs was no ordinary tale of kings and wars. It was a saga of survival, a testament to human resilience, where every choice echoed through generations. What forces propelled them forward, and what legacies did they leave behind for Europe to remember? Long before the arrival of the Magyars, the land between the Danube and Tisa rivers was a crucible of civilizations, a crossroads where empires clashed and cultures collided. Known as Pannonia, this fertile region was once the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, its cities alive with commerce and culture. Aquincum, modern-day Budapest, Severia, Sopron, and other cities flourished with amphitheaters, baths, aqueducts, and temples. Yet, beneath this grandeur, the land simmered with the restless pulse of history, waiting to erupt. What shadows lingered after Rome's fall, and how did they shape the destiny of those who came next? When the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, Pannonia became a battlefield for migrating peoples, Huns led by Attila, Avars, Slavs, Bulgars, each carving their moment of dominance before vanishing like ghosts. The once orderly province turned into a kaleidoscope of clashing tribes and shifting borders. By the late 8th century, the territory was split among 3 forces: the Avar Khaganate in the east, the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne in the west, and the First Bulgarian Empire to the south. Slavic tribes claimed northern and eastern lands, turning Pannonia into a volatile frontier between east and west, faiths and cultures. It was on this fractured stage that the Magyars would make their fateful entrance. The origin of the Hungarians remains one of Europe's most tantalizing enigmas. Unlike their Slavic, Germanic, and Romance neighbors, the Magyars spoke a Finno-Ugric language, related to Finnish, Estonian, and the tongues of Uralic and Siberian peoples. How did they travel so far from their linguistic cousins? What forces propelled this migration, and what secrets did their ancient tongue conceal? It is here, in the mystery of their origins, that the story's tension deepens, between belonging and alienation, between past and present, between survival and extinction. As the 9th century gave way to the 10th, these questions converged into a moment of destiny. The Magyars crossed the Carpathian Basin, seizing land and rewriting the map of Europe. Their decisions, bold, brutal, and irreversible, would ripple through centuries. From conquerors to kings, from raiders to rulers, the saga of Hungary is a relentless pulse of ambition and fear. How did they balance on this knife's edge? What sacrifices would the people endure to etch their name into history? The answer lies buried in the shadows of their dramatic rise, waiting to be uncovered. What drives a people to abandon their ancestral lands? How far would they go to survive? And at what cost? The story of the Magyar migration is a tale of relentless movement, desperate choices, and the forging of identity through fire and blood. Originating between the Ural Mountains and the Ob River, the ancestors of the Hungarians were hunters and fishermen, small tribes eking out a fragile existence in the forest steppe. But this quiet life was doomed to shatter. By the 5th and 6th centuries A.D., these early Magyars shifted their course south and west, shedding their settled ways for a nomadic life. Traversing vast stretches of land, they reached the unforgiving steppes between the Volga and the Ural. It was here that fate dealt its hand. Contact with Turkic peoples forever altered their trajectory. This collision was not mere happenstance. It was a crucible where Magyar identity was reforged, steeped in new skills and harsh discipline. From the Turks, the Magyars learned the deadly arts of mounted archery and the tactics of light cavalry warfare, feints, false retreats, and lightning strikes that would become their signature on the battlefield. Their society hardened, evolving into a strict hierarchy, with war chiefs and tribal nobility emerging from the chaos. The very name Magyar itself carries Turkic roots, a silent testament to their transformation. But this was only the beginning of a perilous journey westward. By the 8th century, the Magyars pushed further west, settling between the Don and Dnieper rivers, falling under the shadow of the Khazar Khaganate, a powerful empire controlling east-west trade routes. Under Khazar rule, the Magyars refined their military skills and social structure, living in yurts and thriving on horse and sheep herding, fur trade, and slave commerce. Yet beneath the surface, tension brewed as new threats emerged. The late 9th century brought cataclysm. The Pechenegs, a fierce nomadic tribe from the east, began displacing the Magyars from their lands. At the same time, the Khazar Khaganate weakened under pressure from Byzantium and Arab forces. Faced with an existential crisis, the Magyar tribes, led by the warlord Almos, made a fateful decision: to break from their past and strike westward in search of new lands. But these were no aimless wanderers. The Magyars were a tightly knit confederation of 7 primary tribes known as the Het Magyar, or 7 Magyars, soon joined by an 8th, cunning tribe of Turkic origin. Their leadership was dual: a sacred high chief, the Kenda, embodying spiritual authority, and a military commander, the Gyula, directing campaigns with ruthless precision. This intricate social web underpinned a society forged for survival and conquest. Beneath this organized veneer lay a world divided by status and power. At the apex stood the tribal aristocracy, vast herds and devoted followers at their command. Below them, free warriors formed the backbone of the Magyar armies, skilled, disciplined, and deadly. The lowest strata were slaves and semi-dependent people, often prisoners of brutal raids or purchased from slave traders. This hierarchy was both a source of strength and a pivot on which their fate balanced. Their spirituality was no less fierce, a shamanistic belief system tied to nature spirits and ancestor worship. The Talthios, shamans bridging the human and spirit worlds, foretold destinies, healed the sick, and held rituals charged with mystery and power. The Magyars believed deeply in the afterlife, burying their dead with weapons, horse gear, and everyday objects, preparing them for battles and journeys beyond. Yet, as their world changed, so too would their faith. The Magyar migration was no chaotic flight. It was a calculated movement of a people determined to find fertile pastures and secure territories. Along the way, they forged alliances, traded goods, and raided sedentary communities. Each step westward was a choice laden with risk and consequence, absorbing cultural elements from neighbors while fiercely defending their identity. By the end of the 9th century, the Magyars reached the Carpathian Basin, an ancient land ripe for conquest. According to Magyar chronicles, Almos and his chieftains sealed their pact with blood, mixing it in a cup and swearing eternal loyalty to one another. This solemn oath bound them to the impossible task of carving out a homeland. In the year 895, led now by Arpad, son of Almos, the Magyars crossed the Carpathians. Their survival hinged on adaptation, on mastering new realities, or else they would vanish like the Huns and Avars before them. What followed was a transformation of Magyar society, a rebirth in the heart of Pannonia. But the consequences of their choices would ripple through centuries to come, shaping the fate of nations. What happens when an ancient way of life faces extinction? Could one man's faith tip the scales of an entire nation's destiny? The Magyar tribes, once fierce nomads, found themselves speeding toward a monumental transformation as they abandoned their wandering ways for the unforgiving tether of agriculture. Permanent settlements rose like islands in the steppe, crafts flourished, and trade began weaving new networks. Tribal authority, once sacred and fragmented, started crumbling under the weight of centralized power wielded by Prince Takshan and later his son, Geza. But the gravest choice lay ahead, the embrace of Christianity. Would the Magyars sacrifice old gods and freedoms for survival in a Christian Europe? The stakes were existential, the consequences irreversible. Geza's gamble changed the course of history. Seeking allies beyond the steppe, he reached out to the Holy Roman Empire and Byzantine Empire, 2 titans of Christendom. The prince himself was baptized, signaling a seismic shift in allegiance and belief. Yet Gaze's vision was incomplete. His son, Vike, later known as Stephen I Saint, would become the true architect of Hungary's transformation. Born around 975, Vike inherited a fractured kingdom where pagan tribal lords still held sway and resisted the tightening grip of central authority. His father's plans demanded completion, and Vike was groomed with a Western Christian education, baptized in the Roman Rite, and mentored by German clergy. But peace was a fragile illusion, and Vike's reign would ignite a brutal struggle for Hungary's soul. In the year 997, Gaze's death unleashed a storm. Vike's claim to power was challenged by his cousin Kopani, a fierce defender of pagan traditions and tribal rule. According to the ancient Levirate custom, Kopani sought to claim Gaze's widow and the throne, sparking a rebellion that threatened to drown the kingdom in blood. The decisive clash erupted near Veszprém, where German knight Witzelen led Vike's forces, and Vike himself was knighted in the Western Rite before battle. This was no mere fight for power. It was a war between old and new worlds, Christianity versus paganism, monarchy versus tribes. Vike's victories shattered the ancient order, but the cost was a kingdom cleaved by violence and the pain of irreversible change. Having crushed Kopani's uprising, Vike embarked on an uncompromising mission: the systematic Christianization of Hungary. Missionaries flooded in from Germany, Italy, and Bohemia, building monasteries and churches that punctuated the landscape like symbols of a new era. Vike decreed that every 10 villages must erect a church and maintain a priest, imposing the church tithe, a tenth of every harvest, on the people. These were not mere religious reforms. They were instruments of social upheaval. Pagan customs, polygamy, blood feuds, and ancestral gods were outlawed in favor of a rigid Christian moral code and a new calendar of holy days. The old Hungary was dying, but the resistance was far from over. Darkness simmered beneath the surface. Many tribal nobles resisted the erosion of their ancient privileges, enraged by the loss of power and sacred traditions. In the year 1000, a formidable rebellion erupted under the leadership of Gyula, Vike's uncle from Transylvania. Gyula, a believer in Eastern Byzantine Christianity, opposed Vike's Western-oriented policies with a fierce determination. This was no ordinary feud. It was a confrontation between two Christian visions vying for Hungary's soul. Vike's forces crushed the uprising, annexing Transylvania and tightening the grip of the centralized kingdom. Yet the shadow of defiance lingered, promising more turmoil to come. The rebellion was far from over. In 1003, a new insurrection ignited in the southeast, fueled by Aten, a local chieftain who, like Gyula, adhered to Byzantine Christianity and maintained alliances with Constantinople. This second uprising exposed the fragile web of loyalties, faiths, and power that the fledgling kingdom had to navigate. Vike faced not just battles of steel, but a war of ideologies, a clash between Eastern and Western Christianity, between old tribal freedoms and the iron fist of monarchy. Every choice he made risked fracturing Hungary beyond repair or forging a new, unyielding state. The consequences would echo through centuries, but the moment of truth was now. What if a single decision could reshape an entire kingdom? What if loyalty was a double-edged sword, turning allies into enemies overnight? King István faced this brutal reality when his former ally Csanád betrayed him, leading forces against him under István's command. The battlefield was ruthless. Aten, once a formidable leader, was defeated and killed. His lands were swallowed by the expanding Hungarian kingdom, a conquest that marked the beginning of irreversible change. The fate of a people hung in the balance as power shifted hands. István's grip extended beyond the battlefield. He seized control of vital salt mines and imposed heavy taxes on trade along the Magyars River, tightening his hold on the region's lifeblood. But this was more than mere conquest. It was a transformation of governance itself. The old tribal structures, hereditary and fragmented, were dismantled. In their place rose the comitatus system, administrative units ruled by royal officials known as ispans. Their power was absolute, appointed directly by István and loyal only to him, standing in stark contrast to the inherited authority of tribal chieftains. This seismic shift in power sparked quiet tensions beneath the surface. In tandem with political reform came the forging of a new state. István established a royal council composed of the highest church dignitaries and secular officials, which not only advised the king but also acted as the supreme court. A sprawling royal court emerged, with offices such as chancellor, treasurer, judge, and military commander, all central to the machinery of centralized power. These innovations were the scaffolding of a kingdom seeking legitimacy and stability, standing on the volatile edge of medieval Europe's shifting landscape. Yet, beneath the grandeur, the stakes of István's reforms were immense and fraught with peril. To unify his realm economically, István introduced a single coinage, the silver denarius, minted in the royal workshop at Esztergom. Alongside this, he standardized weights and measures, laying the groundwork for burgeoning trade. Around royal fortresses, bishoprics, and crossroads of commerce, the first towns began to sprout, symbols of a state moving from nomadic roots toward permanence and order. But each innovation tightened the web of control, leaving little room for dissent. What price would the people and nobility pay for this new order? The tension was mounting. The crowning moment of István's reign was not on the battlefield, but in a sacred ceremony. On Christmas Day, the year 1000, Pope Sylvester II sent István the royal crown, a divine endorsement that elevated Hungary to the status of a Christian kingdom among European powers. This crown of Saint István became not just regalia, but a sacred symbol of Hungarian statehood, binding faith and authority inextricably. The weight of this moment was immense. Political sovereignty and spiritual legitimacy were now fused, but such grandeur carried with it the pressures of expectation and rivalry. István's vision was not merely political, but deeply legal. He codified two collections of laws that regulated nearly every aspect of life, from enforcing Christian rights to punishing crimes with severity by today's standards, but progressive for his time. These laws sought to impose order on a restless land, to turn chaos into system, to bind people and power with legal chains. Yet every law was a choice, irreversible and heavy with consequence, shaping the lives of generations. Behind this legal fortress lay the fear of disorder and rebellion, fear that could consume even the strongest king. Education, too, was a battlefield of transformation. Under István's reign, the first schools appeared, nestled within monasteries and cathedral chapters. Here, future priests and royal officials learned the skills to serve a new kind of kingdom. István himself was an anomaly, a ruler fluent in multiple languages, literate in an age when kings were rarely scholars. This intellectual edge empowered him, but also isolated him in a world wary of change. The quiet halls of learning hid restless ambitions and the shadows of doubt. But even the strongest reign is vulnerable to personal tragedy. István's only son and heir, Imre, died in a hunting accident in the year 1031. With no direct male heir, István was forced to name his nephew Peter Orciola, son of his sister and the Venetian doge Otto Orciola, as successor. This decision shattered the fragile unity among the Hungarian nobility, many of whom desired a continuation of the Arpad bloodline. The seed of discord was planted, threatening to unravel everything István had built. The kingdom stood on the edge of a dynastic crisis. István's life ended on August 15th, 1038. He was buried in the basilica at Székesfehérvár, a monument to his legacy. Revered as a saint even during his lifetime, his canonization by Pope Gregory VII in 1083 cemented his spiritual and political stature. August 20th, Saint István's Day, became Hungary's foremost national celebration, a reminder of a ruler who forged a nation out of chaos. Yet behind the veneration lay the wounds of loss, betrayal, and the fragile nature of power. From a loose confederation of nomadic tribes, István created a Christian kingdom anchored in European civilization. His reforms ripped apart old loyalties and forged new ones, aligning Hungary's destiny with the West. This was no mere political act. It was a cultural and spiritual reorientation that would define the nation for centuries. But every step toward order demanded sacrifices, every law a price, every crown a challenge. The story of István is a story of irreversible choices, where human fear and ambition collide in a relentless tide of history. István's successor, László I, inherited a kingdom still caught in the turbulent birth pangs of statehood. Energetic and determined, László completed the Christianization process, founding new bishoprics and monasteries. His reign was marked by strict laws, safeguarding private property and enforcing social order, including harsh penalties for theft and banditry. The struggle to tame lawlessness was unending, and every crackdown risked stoking rebellion. The kingdom's fragile peace depended on leaders willing to make unforgiving choices. What does it take to forge an empire from chaos? How far would a ruler go to secure power, and at what cost? László I faced these brutal questions head-on as he crushed the remnants of an unstable past, wiping out the lawlessness that once plagued his land. By the year 1991, he had expanded Hungary's borders dramatically, conquering Croatia and uniting it with Hungary through a personal union, an unprecedented fusion of crowns. But this was only the beginning of his relentless ambition. László's conquest didn't stop at Croatia. He seized Slavonia, the fertile lands between the Drava and Sava rivers, further solidifying his grip on the region. Yet beyond raw power, László was a fervent Christian warrior, deeply involved in the turbulent politics of Europe. He stood firmly behind Pope Gregory VII in the fierce clash with Emperor Henry IV, a conflict that would reshape Christendom. His vision reached even further. He was among the architects of the First Crusade, a holy war he wouldn't live to witness. The stakes were monumental, and his devotion to faith would echo long after his death. In a strategic move blending faith and dynasty, Laszlo initiated the canonization of his father István I, his son Imre, and Bishop Gellert, who was mercilessly slain during a pagan uprising in the year 1046. These sanctifications weren't mere religious acts. They cemented the prestige of the Arpad dynasty and the Hungarian Church, intertwining sacred authority with royal power. But even sanctity could not shield Laszlo from the inexorable passage of time. In 1995, he breathed his last and was laid to rest in the Cathedral of Nagyvarad, today known as Arad in Romania. His legacy, however, was immortalized when he was canonized in 1192, forever enshrined as Hungary's ideal Night King. The throne passed to his nephew, Koloman the Learned, a monarch unlike any other of his era. Originally destined for the church, Koloman was an avid scholar, and his love of books earned him his enduring nickname. Under his guidance, Hungary's expansion surged forward. He completed the conquest of Croatia and Dalmatia begun by Laszlo. In the summer of 1102, Koloman was crowned with the Croatian crown in Belgrade on the sea, a symbolic gesture that preserved Croatian institutions and customs. This respect for local tradition eased Croatia's integration, but behind the scenes, forces were brewing that would test Koloman's rule. Koloman was no mere conqueror. He was a progressive legislator whose laws broke sharply with the harsh customs of his time. He outlawed torture and trial by ordeal, abolished witch hunts, declaring that no such witches existed, and protected the rights of Jews and Muslims living in Hungary, radical acts that set his kingdom apart in medieval Europe. Yet the tranquility of his reign was shattered by blood ties turned to bitter rivalry. His own brother, Almos, repeatedly rebelled, challenging the king's authority. The conflict escalated until, in a grim echo of Byzantine brutality, Koloman ordered the blinding of Almos and his young son, Bela, a barbarous act that stained his reign and sowed seeds of future turmoil. Koloman's death in 1116 marked the beginning of a turbulent chapter. His son, István II, inherited the crown, but lacked his father's strength and vision. Weakened by military defeats and political instability, his reign faltered, ending childless and paving the way for a man many thought broken by cruelty, Bela II, the Blind. Blinded as a child on Koloman's orders, Bela's physical impairment masked a mind sharpened by adversity and determination. With the unwavering support of his Serbian wife Helena and loyal advisors, Bela reclaimed royal power, crushing the rebellious nobles responsible for his and his father's mutilation. Under Bela II's rule, Hungary forged crucial alliances, notably through a dynastic marriage that strengthened ties with Serbia. Though marked by violence, his reign restored order and dignity to a kingdom rattled by internal strife. His son, Geza II, ascended the throne as a child in the year 1141, with regents steering the realm during his youth. Yet Geza would grow into a formidable monarch, energetic and capable, determined to propel Hungary into a new era. His policies encouraged German colonists to settle in Transylvania, sowing the seeds of demographic and cultural transformation that would echo through centuries, decisions made in youth that shaped the destiny of a nation forever poised between East and West. What if the fate of entire kingdoms hinged on brutal, calculated decisions? How do leaders balance ambition with the crushing weight of consequence? The reign of Géza II of Hungary thrusts us into a relentless tempest of power struggles and war. He unleashed Hungarian forces multiple times against Kievan Rus, backing Prince Izyaslav Mstislavich against the formidable Yuri Dolgoruki. Hungarian armies marched into the heart of Kiev itself, seizing it, even if only briefly. Yet these bloody campaigns were more than mere conquest. They threatened to unravel the region's delicate fabric. As if caught in a deadly dance, Géza's Hungary clashed fiercely with the Byzantine Empire over control of the Balkans. Supporting Serbian Župan Uroš II against Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, Géza's victories came at a staggering cost. Success drained Hungary's very lifeblood, depleting resources and deepening vulnerabilities. The tension mounted as enemies lurked, waiting for any sign of weakness. Could Hungary sustain this precarious dominance? When Géza II died, the throne's legacy became a deadly gamble. His son, Stephen III, ascended amid fierce familial rivalry. His uncles, Ladislaus II and Stephen IV, backed by Byzantine might, wrested the crown away, igniting a bitter power struggle. Despite reclaiming his throne, Stephen's grasp remained fragile, his reign shadowed by constant Byzantine interference. What choices would he make to survive in this treacherous game? Then emerged Bela III, Stephen's brother, shaped by years in Constantinople's imperial court. Deeply influenced by Byzantine culture and governance, Bela returned to Hungary with a vision to transform a fractured kingdom. Introducing written administration and reorganizing finances, he tightened royal control and boosted revenues. New royal palaces rose, most notably in Esztergom, symbolizing Hungary's renewed strength. Was this the dawn of a golden era, or just another chapter in a relentless quest for power? Bela's ambitions stretched beyond borders. Seizing the moment after Emperor Manuel's death, Hungary reasserted control over Dalmatia and expanded influence across the Balkans. He forged vassal ties with Bosnia and supported Serbian rulers against Byzantine domination, while meddling in the affairs of the Principality of Galicia. Every move was calculated, every alliance a double-edged sword. Could Bela's bold policies withstand the looming shadows of Byzantine resurgence? Marriage sealed more than alliances, wove Hungary into the tapestry of Western Europe. Bela's first wife, Anna of Antioch, brought fragments of Franco-Norman culture. His second, Margaret of France, linked Hungary with the courts of Philip Augustus and the English crown. Through these unions, Hungary's royal court blossomed into a vibrant cultural hub, attracting artists, musicians, and scholars across the continent. Power, however, is never just cultural. It is fragile and fiercely contested. By the time Bela died, Hungary had reached a peak unseen in medieval Central Europe. Royal revenues rivaled those of France and England, and influence spread from the Adriatic to the Black Sea. But the future was anything but secure. Bela's eldest son, Emmerich, inherited a realm fraught with internal rebellion. His younger brother, Andrew, had been granted vast wealth on the condition of joining a crusade, but instead he used funds to ignite unrest. The kingdom teetered on the brink of chaos. Andrew's ambitions tore the royal family apart and fractured the state. His son, Bela IV, rose with a fierce resolve to restore royal authority and reclaim lands scattered by his father's policies. Yet his reforms sparked bitter conflicts with powerful magnates, igniting a simmering civil war that would scorch Hungary throughout his reign. Each choice carved deep scars. Would Bela succeed in rebuilding a shattered kingdom, or would these internal wars doom them all? What happens when a kingdom stands alone against an unstoppable force? How far can desperation push a ruler? In the spring of 1241, the ominous news shattered the fragile peace. Mongol hordes were marching toward Hungary. King Bela IV, desperate and isolated, reached out to Western monarchs for aid, but his pleas fell on deaf ears, leaving him to face the storm alone. With every resource gathered, he prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of his realm. The stage was set for the catastrophic clash at the Battle of Mohi on April 11th, 1242. The battlefield became a nightmare. Under the ruthless command of Batu Khan, the Mongol forces crushed the Hungarian army with overwhelming force. King Bela barely escaped with his life, fleeing the carnage that swallowed his troops. Cities fell like dominoes, razed to the ground. Countless lives were either slaughtered or dragged into captivity. Only the strongest fortresses, especially those in the west and the mountain strongholds, held their ground against the relentless invaders. The kingdom was broken, its heart bleeding. Yet, the nightmare was far from over. Bela's flight turned into a desperate struggle for survival. First to Austria, where Duke Frederick II of Babenberg held him effectively hostage, demanding ransom and territorial concessions. Then to Dalmatia, seeking refuge on the island of Trogir, a shadowed exile waiting for the Mongols to withdraw. But what could force the seemingly invincible Mongols to retreat? The answer came in 1242, an unexpected withdrawal, a sudden silence in the storm. The death of Great Khan Ogedei sent ripples through the vast Mongol Empire, calling commanders back to elect a new leader. Supply lines frayed, disease spread through the ranks, and the vast army began to crumble from within. Fate had intervened, sparing Hungary from total annihilation, for now. Bela returned to a land ravaged beyond recognition, a kingdom in ruins, its people shattered. But surrender was not in his blood. He embarked on a monumental quest to rebuild what was lost. Bela's vision was bold and unyielding. He invited settlers from Germany and Bohemia to repopulate the desolate lands, breathing new life into the empty fields. New towns rose from ashes, granted privileges and self-governance, becoming beacons of hope amid despair. Mining flourished, especially gold and silver extraction, fueling a financial revival that was as crucial as the stones laid in the new cities. But Bela's reforms went deeper. He reshaped the very fabric of his kingdom's defense and politics. The king understood that the old ways were no longer enough. The era of wooden fortresses had ended. Stone castles became the new bastions of survival, and Bela encouraged nobles to build them by granting lands and privileges. Yet, this strategy carried a dangerous cost. The magnates grew stronger, their power swelling like a rising tide, threatening to erode royal authority itself. Meanwhile, Bela forged a new army, modeled after Western heavy cavalry, and summoned the Knights Hospitaller to guard the eastern borders. The foundation of a new Hungary was being laid, brick by brick, sword by sword. On the right bank of the Danube, a new fortified capital rose, Buda, poised across from Pest. This city would become the heart of the future Budapest, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. But Béla's challenges extended beyond his borders. Through strategic marriages, his daughters were wed to rulers of Poland, Bohemia, Bulgaria, and various Russian principalities, weaving a fragile web of alliances meant to shield Hungary from future threats. Yet the shadows of ambition and rivalry loomed ever closer. The death of the last Babenberg Duke in 1246 opened a new chapter of conflict. Béla seized the moment, occupying parts of Austria, but his grasp was tenuous. The Czech king, Přemysl Ottokar II, proved a formidable rival, ultimately wresting control of Austria away from Hungary. A peace treaty in 1260 forced Béla to relinquish his claims in exchange for Styria, a fleeting victory that soon slipped through his fingers. The tides of war and diplomacy battered the kingdom relentlessly. As if external enemies were not enough, Béla faced a storm within his own bloodline. His son and heir, Stephen, ruling Transylvania as junior king, demanded greater power and autonomy. The father and son clashed in a brutal civil war from 1264 to 1265, tearing the kingdom apart. The conflict ended with a fragile compromise. Stephen gained control over the eastern lands, a kingdom divided by ambition and blood. The fractures ran deep, threatening the very unity Béla had fought so hard to preserve. In 1270, King Béla IV breathed his last, laid to rest in the Franciscan church in Esztergom. His reign was marked by relentless struggle, near destruction, and monumental rebirth. He saved Hungary from utter ruin after the Mongol invasion and laid the groundwork for its future. But the choices he made, between survival and sovereignty, between empowering nobles and preserving royal power, cast long shadows over the kingdom's destiny. The echoes of his decisions would reverberate through Hungarian history for generations to come. What happens when a young boy inherits a throne amid chaos and looming threats? After the sudden death of Béla IV, his son, István V, ascended to the Hungarian throne, but ruled only briefly from 1270 to 1272. His reign was marked by instability, marred by constant clashes with neighboring states and powerful Hungarian magnates. Yet even more shocking was István's unexpected death, thrusting his 10-year-old son, László IV, into power under the regency of his mother, Elizabeth the Cuman. The stage was set for a reign fraught with peril and irreversible consequences. László IV, known as László the Cuman for his maternal heritage, was raised amidst the customs of the Cumans, a Turkic nomadic tribe welcomed into Hungary by Béla IV after the Mongol invasions. His affinity for Cuman culture alienated the Hungarian nobility and the church alike. In 1277, the papal legate excommunicated the young king, condemning his pagan lifestyle and threatening his legitimacy. Could a ruler so divided from his own people hold the kingdom together? Tension simmered beneath the surface, ready to explode. Despite internal turmoil, László achieved a stunning military victory at the Battle of the Moravian Field in 1278, defeating the Czech king Přemysl Ottokar II. His army, bolstered by fierce Cuman horsemen, played a decisive role in the triumph of the Habsburg-Hungarian coalition. This victory elevated Hungary's prestige across Europe, but failed to secure the fragile grip László held over his fracturing realm. The king's power remained a house of cards, shaken by dissent and distrust. What shadows lurked behind this fleeting glory? The end came swiftly and mysteriously. In 1290, Laszlo IV was assassinated by his own Cuman retainers, perhaps at the behest of Hungarian magnates who saw him as an obstacle to their ambitions. His death without heirs extinguished the main line of the Arpad dynasty, throwing the kingdom into unprecedented uncertainty. A critical question loomed. Who would claim the throne after 4 centuries of Arpad rule? The corridors of power darkened with uncertainty and intrigue. Into this power vacuum stepped Andras III, grandson of Andras II, who ruled from 1290 to 1300. Known as Andras the Venetian for his upbringing in Venice, he was the last Arpad king. His reign was relentless warfare against rival claimants and internal enemies, striving to preserve both the crown and the dynasty. But his claim was fiercely contested by multiple contenders, notably Charles Martel of Anjou, son of King Charles II of Naples, and Maria of Hungary, the daughter of István V. The papacy sided with the Anjou faction, deepening the crisis. Could Andras hold the throne against such odds? Andras III was no passive ruler. He convened noble assemblies, sought to curb magnate power, and introduced administrative reforms to strengthen royal authority. Yet his efforts were piecemeal against the tide of fracturing power that had engulfed Hungary for decades. His death on January 14, 1300, without a male heir, ended the Arpad dynasty once and for all. The kingdom slipped into a perilous era, an interregnum marked by fierce battles for supremacy among European dynasties. The fate of Hungary now hung by a fragile thread. The ensuing struggle for the throne pitched 3 main rivals against each other. Wenceslas III, son of the Czech king Wenceslas II, Otto of Bavaria, and Charles Robert of Anjou, grandson of King Charles II of Naples and Maria of Hungary. Initially, the Hungarian nobility crowned the young Wenceslas as king, who took on the Hungarian name Laszlo V. However, his reign was short-lived and fragile, a mere waypoint in the turbulent dynastic wars that threatened to tear Hungary apart. Would any claimant emerge as the true ruler in this maelstrom? The kingdom stood on the brink of chaos. Amid the turmoil, Charles Robert of Anjou began weaving a web of alliances through marriage and diplomacy. His third wife, Elizabeth of Poland, daughter of King Władysław I Łokietek, anchored a vital Polish-Hungarian union. His daughters were married into various European houses, integrating Hungary deeper into continental politics. Charles Robert's diplomatic skills culminated in the historic 1335 meeting of 3 kings at Visegrad. Himself, Polish King Casimir III, Elizabeth's brother, and Czech King John of Luxembourg. They settled territorial disputes and forged a new balance of power, signaling a turning point for Hungary's place in Europe. But was this enough to end the chaos? The era that followed was shaped by a series of irreversible choices, alliances forged in fire and blood, betrayals that reshaped borders, and internal divisions that would haunt Hungary for generations. Each decision rippled outward, binding kings and kingdoms in a tense dance of survival and ambition. The dramatic saga of Hungary during the late 13th and early 14th centuries reveals a kingdom caught between tradition and transformation, where human fear and fatal decisions determined its fate. The question remains, could Hungary rise from these ashes, or would its crown forever be lost to history? What does it take to build an empire that stretches from the Adriatic to the Black Sea? How far would a king go to avenge his brother's murder? And at what cost does power come when bloodlines twist and fray? In the summer of 1342, King Charles Robert died in Visegrad, the city he crowned the real capital of Hungary. His legacy did not end with his passing. It passed directly into the hands of his eldest son, Louis, known as Louis the Great. But would the son live up to the father's ambitions, or unravel the fragile web of alliances and conquests?
Louis I ascended the throne not just as a ruler, but as a force of nature. His 40-year reign would be remembered as the golden age of medieval Hungary, a time of unprecedented expansion and international power. Educated, multilingual, and a patron of arts and science, Louis combined intellect with fierce bravery. He led his armies personally, conquering lands and shaping destinies. Yet behind this brilliance lurked the relentless pressure to maintain control that would soon be tested by a lethal family tragedy and the violent pursuit of revenge. In 1345, the brutal assassination of his younger brother Andrew, husband to Joanna I of Naples, sent shockwaves through the royal court. Louis blamed Joanna, launching 2 military campaigns into Naples, driven by fury and grief. The battles were victorious, but the prize slipped away. Naples remained beyond his grasp. It was a stark lesson. Not all conquest could be held, no matter the valor or justice claimed. How do you reconcile triumph with political failure? While Naples proved elusive, Louis found greater success on the Balkan front. Bosnia fell under his sway, Serbia and Wallachia entered into vassalage, and Bulgaria was temporarily absorbed. His influence stretched like a shadow from the Adriatic shores to the Black Sea's edge. Yet these gains were more than territorial. They were strategic lifelines for Hungary's economy and military strength. Rich with salt and other resources, Galicia and Podolia, territories now part of Ukraine, were also drawn into the Hungarian fold. But every extension of power tightened the knot of responsibility and risk. The pinnacle of Louis's external achievements came in 1370 with the Polish crown. Upon the death of King Casimir III, who left no sons, Louis, nephew through his mother, was crowned King of Poland. This personal union between Hungary and Poland dramatically shifted the balance of power in Central Europe. Yet the fusion of 2 realms brought complexities that would soon test the fragile unity forged by dynastic ties. Could one man truly rule 2 kingdoms without unraveling both? Inside Hungary, Louis wielded power with calculated precision. His Golden Bull of 1351 expanded privileges for the lesser and middle nobility, securing their loyalty, while curbing the dominance of the great magnates. Cities flourished under his rule, granted self-governance, tax reliefs, and the right to host fairs. Budapest blossomed into a wealthy metropolis of cultural and economic dynamism. His patronage transformed the royal court into a beacon for artists, musicians, and scholars from across Europe, culminating in the foundation of Hungary's first university in Pécs in 1367, though this institution's life would be brief. Yet, amid this prosperity and power, a silent crisis brewed. Louis died on September 10, 1382, leaving no sons to inherit his vast dominions. only daughters. This absence of a male heir planted the seeds of discord and tragedy. The throne passed to his eldest daughter, Mary, but her reign was anything but secure. In Poland, nobles rejected her rule, crowning her younger sister Jadwiga in 1384, shattering the union Louis had forged. In Hungary, Mary faced fierce opposition, her position precarious and contested. The throne, once a symbol of strength, became a battleground of fragile claims and ruthless ambitions. What happens when the chain of succession breaks? How quickly can a mighty empire unravel into chaos? Louis the Great's reign was marked by triumphs that expanded Hungary's reach and influence, but his final, irreversible choice, the lack of a clear male heir, set in motion a decline that would echo through generations. The Golden Age ended not with a battle, but with the quiet fracture of legacy and power, leaving a kingdom on the edge of collapse. What happens when power is wrested from a queen by those unwilling to accept her rule? How far will a mother go to secure her family's hold on a throne? Queen Elizabeth of Bosnia, the true power behind the throne, ruled Hungary through her daughter alongside her favorite, Palatine Miklos Garai. But their unpopular grip on power ignited a firestorm of rebellion. The Croatian brothers led an uprising, inviting Charles the Small, a distant Neapolitan prince and relative of King Louis, to claim the Hungarian crown. Charles II arrived in Hungary in the year 1385, quickly crowned, but his reign was doomed from the start. The shadow of betrayal loomed large. In 1386, Charles II was mortally wounded in an assassination plot orchestrated by Elizabeth and Garai themselves. His death shattered the fragile peace and plunged the kingdom into a brutal civil war. The supporters of Charles captured both Queen Mary and Elizabeth met her end in captivity, a grim testament to the deadly stakes of power. Amid this chaos, Mary's husband Sigismund of Luxembourg rose to claim his place. He quelled the rebellion and secured his wife's freedom, ascending as co-ruler in 1387. When Mary died in 1395, Sigismund became the sole ruler of Hungary, embarking on a reign that would stretch for half a century, marked by soaring ambition and relentless struggle. But Sigismund's rule was far from secure. Seen as a foreign interloper by much of the Hungarian nobility, he faced fierce resistance. In 1391, a group of magnates even captured and imprisoned him for months. Upon his release, his vengeance was brutal. 32 nobles executed in the city of Buda. Yet this bloody retribution only deepened the fractures within the kingdom. Forced into uneasy compromise, Sigismund had to share power with the very magnates who opposed him. He created a royal council dominated by aristocrats and clergy, essentially institutionalizing oligarchic control over the throne. Yet behind this concession, Sigismund quietly built his own loyal faction, rewarding foreign knights who pledged allegiance to him, and founding the Order of the Dragon to cement their loyalty. While Sigismund balanced power at home, a far greater threat was rising to the south. After the catastrophic Battle of Kosovo in 1389, where the Serbian forces were crushed by the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire cast a dark shadow over Hungary's borders. The stage was set for an epic clash that would decide the fate of the kingdom. In 1396, Sigismund launched a desperate crusade against the Turks, rallying knights from across Europe. But the Battle of Nicopolis on September 25th ended in devastating defeat, a catastrophic blow that shattered hopes of halting Ottoman expansion and deepened Hungary's vulnerability.
Beneath these chaotic tides of war and politics, a silent struggle for the crown was brewing. Elizabeth, having birthed a son named Ladislaus Posthumus, refused to let go of power. She stole the crown of St. Stephen and crowned her infant son, igniting a civil war between the factions supporting Ladislaus and those backing King Vladislaus. This dynastic conflict raged for years, tearing the kingdom apart. In 1444, Vladislaus died fighting the Ottomans at the Battle of Varna, a sudden death that momentarily ended the bitter dispute. Ladislaus V was recognized as king, but the real power rested with János Hunyadi, the young regent who ruled in his stead. János Hunyadi, risen from minor Wallachian nobility through sheer military genius, became Hungary's most formidable commander against the encroaching Ottoman menace. His leadership was a beacon of hope amid the storm, but the fate of Hungary still hung by a fragile thread, caught between relentless external threats and internal fractures that seemed impossible to mend. What does it take to seize power amid relentless threats? How far would a man go to defend his homeland against an unstoppable empire? In the turbulent year of 1441, John Hunyadi rose to command Transylvania as voivode, setting the stage for a destiny entwined with war and politics. Just 5 years later, in 1446, the Hungarian Diet appointed him regent of Hungary. But his authority sparked fierce opposition among powerful magnates who feared his growing influence. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire pressed its relentless advance. Could Hunyadi unify a divided kingdom to face this mortal peril? The answer would come at a devastating cost. In 1448, Sultan Murad II launched a massive incursion into Serbia, threatening the very borders of Hungary. Hunyadi took to the field, leading a desperate army to confront the Turkish forces at Kosovo Field. The battle raged with brutal intensity, but despite his command, Hunyadi suffered a stinging defeat. Narrowly escaping capture, his prestige lay in ruins, and Hungary's fragile internal order teetered on the brink of collapse. Would the kingdom survive this blow, or was it destined to succumb under the weight of internal dissent and external menace? The complexity deepened when young King Ladislaus V came of age in 1452. Raised under the heavy hand of Emperor Frederick III, Ladislaus turned to Ulrich II Sille, a sworn enemy of the Hunyadi family, to serve as his chief advisor. Yet, in a testament to his enduring influence, Hunyadi retained his post as commander-in-chief of the Hungarian army. The stage was set for a deadly power struggle, where loyalty and betrayal would blur. How long could Hunyadi hold the reins while facing enemies both outside and within? Then came the battle that would etch Hunyadi's name into the annals of history. In 1456, at the fortress of Belgrade, Hunyadi confronted Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople himself, and his massive Turkish army. Against staggering odds, the Hungarian defenders repelled wave after wave of assaults, inflicting a crushing defeat on the invaders. This triumph halted Ottoman expansion into Central Europe for decades. But victory bore a deadly price. Just days later,
On August 11th, 1456, Hunyadi succumbed to a plague that swept through the victorious camp. Could this monumental victory mask the fragility of his legacy? The void left by Hunyadi's death sparked a chain of tragic events. His eldest son, Ladislaus Hunyadi, inherited not only his father's titles, but also the enmity of Ulrich Sille and King Ladislaus V. The simmering tensions exploded in November of 1456, when Ladislaus Hunyadi killed Sille during a heated quarrel in Belgrade Castle. Initially pardoned by the king, Ladislaus was soon arrested, along with his younger brother Matthias, upon arrival in Buda. Charged with treason, Ladislaus was executed, and Matthias imprisoned in Prague. What bitterness fueled such ruthless retribution, and could it extinguish the Hunyadi bloodline's power? The execution sent shockwaves through the Hungarian nobility, especially among Hunyadi supporters. Fearing rebellion, King Ladislaus V fled to Prague, seizing the revered crown of St. Stephen, the symbol of legitimate rule. Yet his flight did not bring safety. On November 23, 1457, Ladislaus died unexpectedly, possibly poisoned. His death ended the male line of the Albertinian Habsburgs, shattering the established order. Could the kingdom withstand this violent unraveling of authority, or was a new era about to dawn amid chaos? Amidst this turmoil, Matthias Hunyadi was freed from captivity, opening the door for an unprecedented event. On January 24, 1458, the Hungarian Diet assembled on the frozen Danube near Pest and elected 15-year-old Matthias as king. Never before had a common nobleman ascended the throne. This was a seismic shift, a break from royal bloodlines to the power of national nobility. Known as Matthias Corvinus, after the raven emblem on his coat of arms, he would rule Hungary until 1490. Was this youthful king destined to restore Hungary's might, or be crushed by the forces arrayed against him? Matthias's early reign was fraught with peril. Powerful factions, notably the Garai family, refused to recognize his election and invited Emperor Frederick III to claim the throne. Frederick accepted the invitation, but held on to the crown of St. Stephen, denying Matthias a legitimate coronation. The kingdom's internal fractures deepened as external threats loomed. The Turks resumed their raids across Hungary's southern borders, and George of Podebrady, the king of Bohemia, once an ally, turned into a rival. Could Matthias navigate this labyrinth of enemies and betrayals to solidify his rule and preserve Hungary's fragile independence? What does it take to seize power amid chaos? How far would a ruler go to silence rebellion at home? In the year 1467, Matthias crushed the uprising of the Transylvanian nobles with ruthless efficiency, quashing internal dissent that threatened his reign. Not content with mere force, he wielded diplomacy like a blade, turning former enemies into allies through lavish rewards and coveted offices. But were these calculated moves enough to secure his throne against the tides of unrest? Matthias's early triumphs were not just about power, they were about legitimacy. His crowning achievement was reclaiming the holy crown of St. Stephen, a symbol of divine right that had long been out of reach. After grueling negotiations and unrelenting military pressure, Friedrich III finally conceded, returning the crown for an enormous ransom of 60,000 golden florins. On the 29th of March, 1444, Matthias was officially crowned in Székesfehérvár, solidifying his claim and sending ripples through the halls of power.
But with legitimacy secured, what storm awaited beyond his borders?
The stakes escalated as Matthias launched a bold and relentless foreign policy. Engaged on multiple fronts, he confronted the kingdoms of Bohemia, Poland, the Holy Roman Empire, and the rising Ottoman Empire. His secret weapon was the Black Army, a groundbreaking professional force forged in the fires of innovation and discipline. Unlike the unreliable feudal levies of old, this army was a standing force of seasoned mercenaries from across Europe. Czech Hussites, German Landsknechts, Polish and Serbian warriors. With their black armor gleaming, they embodied a new era of warfare and a new hope for expansion. But could this unprecedented army withstand the mounting threats? The Black Army was a marvel of military evolution. Armed with the latest artillery and early firearms, it employed the famed Hussite tactics of chained wagons, creating mobile fortresses. Their relentless discipline and firepower allowed Matthias to defy convention and seize vast territories. The crowning moment came on the 1st of June, 1485, when, after a grueling siege, Vienna fell into Matthias's hands. The city, once the heart of his adversaries, became his second capital, a testament to his unyielding ambition. But with borders expanded and enemies amassed, would Matthias's reign survive the relentless pressures closing in? Yet Matthias was more than a conqueror. He was a reformer, haunted by the fragility of his kingdom. He overhauled the administration, tightening the grip of central authority and streamlining governance. New taxes swelled the royal coffers, while judicial reforms promised swifter, fairer justice, though not without breeding resentment among nobles. Matthias was also a man of the Renaissance, a scholar fluent in several tongues, a collector of knowledge. His famed Corvina library held nearly 2,500 volumes, many richly illuminated, a beacon of enlightenment amid turbulent times. But could culture and intellect shield a kingdom surrounded by enemies and internal strife? Meanwhile, the threat to Hungary's survival grew ominously closer. The young and inexperienced Lajos II ascended the throne at the tender age of 10, a puppet in the hands of warring magnates more concerned with their own power struggles than national defense. The fortress of Belgrade had fallen, opening a clear path for invasion into central Hungary. As the shadow of the Ottoman Empire loomed larger, Suleiman the Magnificent prepared to strike with overwhelming force. Would Hungary's fractured leadership find strength before it was too late? On the 29th of August, 1526, all hopes and fears collided on the plains of Mohács. Facing an Ottoman army that dwarfed his own, Lajos marched out with barely 25,000 men, refusing to wait for reinforcements from Transylvania or Croatia. The fate of Hungary hinged on that brutal confrontation, a desperate gamble where every decision bore the weight of a nation's survival. The question was no longer if Hungary would fall, but when and how utterly. What happens when a kingdom faces an enemy force 2 to 3 times its size? Can courage and strategy outweigh sheer numbers? In the heart of Europe, the Battle of Mohács erupted, a swift and catastrophic clash that shattered Hungary's fate in just 2 hours. Over 15,000 soldiers perished, alongside 2 archbishops, 5 bishops, and numerous noble magnates. King Lajos II, desperate to escape, drowned in the waters of the Cheli Brook. The medieval Hungarian kingdom, once proud and sovereign, lay in ruins. But the nightmare had only just begun. The Ottomans swiftly seized Buda, Hungary's capital, pillaging its treasures before retreating, lacking the resources to hold the land. Lajos's death without an heir plunged Hungary into chaos. Two rival claimants tore the nation apart. On one side stood János Szápolyai, Transylvania's voivode, backed by the lesser nobility and promising defense against the Turks. On the other, the powerful Western magnates rallied behind Ferdinand of Habsburg, brother to Emperor Charles V and husband to Lajos's sister, Anna Jagiellon. This split ignited a brutal civil war, with stakes far beyond crowns and thrones. As battles raged between Szápolyai and Ferdinand, desperation drove János to make a fateful choice. Defeated on the field, he sought aid from the very empire threatening Hungary's survival, the Ottomans. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent agreed to support János, but at a devastating price: recognition of Ottoman suzerainty. In 1529, Suleiman invaded Hungary again, routing Ferdinand's forces and reinstating János as king. Yet, his ambitions did not end there. Marching on Vienna, Suleiman faced the city's walls and suffered his first major defeat in Europe. A turning point, or the calm before an even greater storm? In 1538, a fragile peace emerged, the Treaty of Várad. János was acknowledged as Hungary's king, but upon his death, the kingdom was to pass to Ferdinand. Yet fate twisted again. On his deathbed in 1540, János fathered a son, János Zsigmond. Defying the treaty, he left the crown to his newborn heir, reigniting the flames of civil war and inviting Ottoman interference once more. The following year, Suleiman seized Buda for good, carving Hungary into three parts: Ottoman Central Hungary, Transylvania as a vassal state under young János and his mother Isabella Jagiellon, and Royal Hungary, controlled by Ferdinand and the Habsburgs. The fractures would endure for over a century and a half, shaping the destiny of a nation and a continent. Within Ottoman Hungary, the old Hungarian capital transformed into an imperial province governed by a pasha appointed by the Sultan. The land was divided into sanjaks, each ruled by a sanjak bey. The Ottomans did not enforce forced Islamization, but imposed harsh realities. Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, were considered dhimmis, protected yet burdened with the jizya tax and severe restrictions. Life for the Hungarian people became a daily struggle under oppressive taxation, constant warfare, and the arbitrary rule of local authorities. The scars of war ran deep, but the suffering was just beginning. The economy crumbled under the weight of conflict. Cities lay in ruins, trade routes severed, and agriculture devastated by relentless battles and soaring taxes. Population numbers plummeted, ravaged by war, disease, and flight to safer lands. Hungary's heart bled as its people faced an uncertain future, torn by the consequences of decisions made in desperate moments. What price would they pay for these irreversible choices? And how would the echoes of this shattered kingdom shape the history of Europe? What cost does autonomy carry when a land stands between empires? Transylvania, nestled in the eastern stretches of the former Hungarian kingdom, bore a precarious status. Officially a vassal to the Ottoman Empire, it paid tribute to the Sultan and contributed forces to his campaigns. Yet behind this facade, Transylvania wielded remarkable internal autonomy
and conducted its own foreign policy, teetering between the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg monarchy. But how long could this delicate balance hold under the shadow of two great powers? Transylvania emerged as a sanctuary for Hungarian culture and statehood amid Ottoman dominion. Here, political institutions like the Sam and Diet endured, nurturing the embers of Hungarian sovereignty. The princes from the Zapolia, Bathory, Bocskai, Bethlin, and Rákóczi dynasties carried the torch of Hungary's traditions, often staking claims to reunite all Hungarian lands. Yet this fragile cultural fortress lay vulnerable to the unforgiving tides of war and diplomacy. Could these leaders preserve their vision, or would they be crushed beneath the grinding gears of empire? In an unprecedented move, Transylvania became one of Europe's earliest strongholds of religious freedom. The Turkish Edict of 1568 guaranteed tolerance for four recognized religions: Catholicism, Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Unitarianism. This policy drew countless religious refugees seeking refuge from persecution across the continent. But did this embrace of diversity stir unity or sow seeds of discord? And what storm was brewing beyond these walls as religious tensions festered across Europe? Beneath its cultural glow, Transylvania's prosperity thrived on rich veins of gold, silver, salt, and other precious minerals. Its agriculture, especially animal husbandry, flourished, while trade routes stretched outward to Moldavia, Wallachia, and Poland. This economic vitality masked the looming dangers, a region prosperous but restless, caught in the deadly dance of empires. Could wealth shield it from the growing turmoil, or was it merely bait for ravenous powers? Meanwhile, the western and northern parts of historic Hungary fell under Habsburg rule, forming Royal Hungary. Ferdinand I and his successors bore the title of Kings of Hungary, yet controlled only fragments of the former kingdom. The capital moved to Pressburg, modern-day Bratislava, where the Sejm convened under the watchful eyes of Habsburg administrators. But royal ambition clashed sharply here with noble resistance. The Hungarian aristocracy, torn between seeing the Habsburgs as protectors against the Ottoman threat and fearing loss of privilege, found themselves trapped in a deadly tug-of-war. How long before this tension ignited into open conflict? Hungarian political institutions persisted in Royal Hungary, the Sejm, the Palatine, judges, and treasurers, but real power slipped steadily into the hands of imperial councils in Vienna. The court council, treasury chamber, and military council dictated policies directly from the emperor's seat. This centralization crushed local autonomy, pushing the Hungarian nobility to the edge. Would the nobility swallow their pride and accept the empire's tightening grip, or would they risk everything in rebellion? The relentless wars against the Turks drained Royal Hungary's resources, bleeding the land dry. Most of the revenue extracted from Hungarian soil poured into sustaining military campaigns far from home. Yet in one crucial battle, the tide seemed to turn. In 1664, a united European army under Imperial General Raymond Montecuccoli crushed Ottoman forces at the Battle of St. Gothard. Victory, however, was hollow. The subsequent Peace of Vasvar favored the Ottomans, igniting fury among the Hungarian magnates. How could such a triumph be undermined so swiftly, and what desperate measures would the nobility soon take? Frustration erupted into conspiracy. A plot brewed among Hungarian magnates against the Habsburg rulers, seeking to reclaim their dignity and autonomy. Notable leaders like Palatine Ferenc Wesselenyi, Ban of Croatia Petar Zrinski, his brother Miklos Zrinyi, the famed poet, and Ferenc I Rákóczi became embroiled in this deadly gambit. But betrayal lurked nearby. The conspiracy was uncovered and crushed with ruthless force. The rebellion's leaders faced execution or perished in prisons, their dreams extinguished in chains. What price would Emperor Leopold I demand for this act of submission? Seizing the moment, Leopold I imposed direct imperial rule over Hungary, temporarily suspending its constitution. The era of Habsburg dominance tightened its grip with harsh repression and centralized administration. The old order crumbled as Vienna's power surged, leaving Hungary battered and broken. This was no longer a kingdom of dukes and nobles, but a land under an unyielding imperial fist. Yet beneath the surface, embers of resistance smoldered, waiting to ignite. Would Hungary's spirit ever rise again, or was this the irreversible end of its independence? What happens when a kingdom torn by faith and fear ignites a rebellion that could change the fate of an empire? In 1678, Imre Tokoli, leading a ragtag force of peasants and minor nobles, sparked the Kuruk uprising against the Protestant oppression enforced by the Habsburgs. His bold gamble was not just rebellion, it was a declaration of war against imperial power and religious tyranny. But Tokoli's rebellion was more than a local revolt. It was a chess move on the grandest stage. With the support of the Ottoman Empire, Tokoli was crowned King of Middle Hungary, a buffer state carved between the Ottomans and the Habsburg realms in 1683. This bold political maneuver shook the continent, setting the stage for a confrontation that would decide the destiny of Central Europe. The Ottoman response was swift and devastating. Under the command of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the siege of Vienna in 1683 became the defining moment of an empire's ambition. But the siege ended in catastrophic failure. The Ottoman forces were crushed by the united armies of the Holy League, forged at the behest of Pope Innocent X, with Polish King Jan III Sobieski playing the hero who turned the tide. This crushing defeat was the turning point. No longer the unstoppable force, the Ottoman Empire began its painful retreat from Europe. But retreat was only the beginning of a new, brutal chapter. The Holy League's armies, including Austria, Poland, Venice, and later Russia, launched relentless campaigns against the Turks, forcing them from their long-held strongholds, one by one. In 1686, the imperial forces stormed Buda, the capital of Ottoman Hungary, held for nearly a century and a half. 1 year later, they crushed Ottoman forces at Mohacs, on the very plains where Hungary had suffered a catastrophic defeat more than a century and a half before. With each victory, the Habsburgs tightened their grip, pushing the Ottoman forces back inch by inch. By 1699, the vast majority of historic Hungary had been wrested from Ottoman control, except for the Banat region. The war culminated with the Treaty of Karlowitz, where the Ottoman Empire formally recognized Habsburg rule over Hungary and Transylvania, ending centuries of Ottoman influence and beginning a new era of Habsburg dominance. But liberation was a cruel illusion. Freed from Ottoman chains, Hungary fell under a new yoke. Habsburg rule was not freedom, but conquest disguised as salvation. The empire viewed the reclaimed lands as spoils, to be parceled out with little regard for Hungarian laws or traditions, sparking a bitter struggle over land and power. The Neo-Acquistica Commission was established to manage this redistribution, a brutal bureaucracy that forced Hungarian nobles to prove ownership of their estates, many of which had been seized during the chaos. Lands were handed over to foreign nobles loyal to the Habsburgs, Germans, Czechs, Italians, deepening resentment and dividing the nation's fabric. Simultaneously, the Habsburgs pursued a relentless policy of counter-reformation, attempting to drag Hungary back into the Catholic fold. Protestant churches were restricted, and Protestant nobles were stripped of government positions. Archbishop Leopold Kolinic of Esztergom, president of the Hungarian treasury, spearheaded this campaign, tightening the noose around dissenting communities. To make matters worse, the population was crushed under heavy taxes levied to fund ongoing imperial wars. Imperial troops, quartered across Hungarian towns and villages, acted with impunity. Harassment, extortion, and violence became daily realities. Peasants bore the brunt of this repression, squeezed by both imperial demands and escalating feudal oppression from landowners. These unbearable burdens sparked a new flame of rebellion in 1703. Ferenc II Rákóczi, the son of a conspirator and stepson to Imre Tököly, emerged as the leader of the Kuruc uprising against Habsburg oppression. Unlike before, Rákóczi united a broad coalition, from peasants and townsfolk to middle and high nobility, under a single banner poised to defy imperial authority. At the uprising's peak, Rákóczi controlled much of Hungary, challenging the might of the Habsburg Empire itself. In 1704, the Diet at Alba Giulia declared him prince, a title charged with revolutionary defiance and hope. But with every bold step, the stakes soared higher. Could this uprising break the chains of foreign domination or plunge Hungary into deeper turmoil? What if a single choice could topple an entire rebellion? What drives a leader to risk everything for a dream of freedom? Ferenc Rákóczi II, chosen in 1705 as the ruler of Hungary by the Confederation of Hungarian Estates in Széchenyi, embarked on a bold war against the Habsburgs. For 8 long years he fought with French support, clashing with the Austrians amid the War of Spanish Succession. But was victory ever truly within grasp? The tide of war shifted harshly in 1708 at Trenčín, where Rákóczi's Kuruc forces faced a devastating defeat. The movement's momentum began to falter, and cracks appeared in the noble ranks as many switched allegiance to the emperor, lured by amnesty. How fragile is loyalty when survival is at stake. In 1711, desperate, Rákóczi traveled to Poland to seek aid from Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. Yet his absence unraveled the fragile unity he had built. Without their leader, his general Sándor Károly struck the Treaty of Szatmár, granting amnesty in exchange for loyalty to the Habsburg Emperor. What price freedom when your cause crumbles behind your back? Rákóczi refused to acknowledge the treaty, choosing exile over submission. He spent his remaining days in France and the Ottoman Empire, never abandoning the dream of Hungarian liberation. He died in Radasztó, today's Tekirdağ, Turkey, in 1735.
Could one man's refusal to yield spark hope beyond his lifetime?
The Treaty of Satmar marked a turning point. It confirmed Habsburg dominion over Hungary, but preserved noble privileges, religious freedom, constitutional rights, parliamentary powers, and tax exemptions. This uneasy compromise allowed the Habsburg monarchy and Hungarian aristocracy to coexist peacefully for nearly a century and a half. Was peace worth the price of shattered rebellion?
Following the rebellion's collapse, Hungary entered an era of cautious reconstruction under Emperor Charles VI, who reigned from 1711 to 1740 and ruled Hungary as Charles III. Unlike his predecessor Leopold I, Charles sought cooperation with the Hungarian nobility, needing their support to pass the Pragmatic Sanction, a law ensuring Habsburg inheritance through his daughter, Maria Theresa. Could pragmatism salvage a fractured kingdom?
In 1722, the Hungarian Diet accepted the Pragmatic Sanction, recognizing Maria Theresa's right to the throne. In return, Charles VI reaffirmed the nobles' constitutional rights and privileges. His reign became a time of recovery and reform after decades of war and revolt. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered, threatening to resurface. Administrative reforms reshaped Hungary. A permanent governor's council was established in Pressburg, committee systems reorganized, and desolate regions in southern Hungary, Banat, Bacska, and Baranya, were repopulated with settlers from German lands and Serbia. The seeds of modern statehood were being sown, but at what cost to tradition and identity? Joseph II, heir to Charles VI and a sonless monarch's hope, embraced Enlightenment ideals and sought to transform the archaic, multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire into a centralized, efficient state modeled after Frederick the Great's Prussia. Unlike his mother, he disregarded Hungarian noble privileges and constitutional rights, sparking fierce resistance. How far could reformers push before rebellion ignites anew? Joseph II refused the Hungarian crown, earning the nickname the King in the Hat for his disdain of tradition. He ruled by decree, bypassing the Hungarian Diet, which was not convened throughout his reign. His relentless reforms unleashed waves of tension across the kingdom. Would his vision unify the empire or shatter it irreparably?